Welcome to another episode of Tank Talks, your personal think tank for all things startups and venture capital. I'm your host, Matt Cohen, founder and managing partner at Ripple Ventures. On today's show, we are talking about the evolution of AdTech and how startups are competing globally with the founder and CEO of Marpipe, Dan Pantelo. The evolution of advertising has experienced some major breakthroughs over the years, as it has had to adapt and change to the various new platforms and mediums constantly being built, with the biggest one obviously being the internet. Over the last 2 decades, marketers have been salivating at all the data being made available to them through platforms like Facebook to help them create hyper-personalized ads, which has allowed most tech-savvy marketers to deliver incredible results over the last several years. However, on today's show, we talk with Dan about how the ad tech industry is starting to face some challenges with privacy concerns and the recent iOS changes, which are making it harder to target customers more effectively. Finally, we dig into ways user-generated content is helping companies build trust with consumers and how platforms like TikTok and Instagram are allowing companies to deliver higher performance-based ad campaigns and how Marpipe is helping deliver better results in real time. But before we get started today, I wanted to share some exciting news for all our startup founders out there who are selling to the enterprise and probably getting lots of questions around their company's security posture. For anyone that is lucky enough to be part of building startups, we've all seen that mad rush to answer extensive security questionnaires and implement SOC 2 controls the moment that big whale of a client is on the hook in order to not lose that deal, which unfortunately ends up swallowing the entire organization's time and resources in the hopes to land that whale, right? Lucky for us at Ripple, we have partnered with compliance automation provider Drata. Drata saves our portfolio companies from these same issues when it comes to effectively proving a strong, ongoing security posture and achieving frameworks like SOC 2 and ISO 27001. Drata allows startups to put security and compliance in autopilot. Companies using Drata experience an average time savings of 85% when compared to running the SOC 2 process manually. Build trust with customers by proving your commitment to security and maintain continuous compliance in between your audits. Don't take it from us, Drata works with all kinds of startups like Clearco, Lemonade, Full Story, Slice, and countless others. They're backed by top venture funds such as Octa Ventures and GGV and are currently G2's #1 ranked cloud compliance software provider for customer satisfaction. Listeners of Tank Talks can get set up with a demo of Drata and take advantage of a 15% discount offer and waived implementation fees by visiting drata.com/Tank Talks to get set up today. Now let's get into this week's episode with Dan Pantelo, founder and CEO of Marpipe. Thanks for joining us in the tank today, Dan.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. It's great to be here.
The evolution of advertising has experienced some major breakthroughs over the years, as it has had to adapt and change to suit new platforms and mediums constantly. Most significantly, it's become much more personalized throughout history. And the one medium that has had the biggest impact on the history of advertising and personalization is obviously the internet and its ability to collect billions of data points on users. For example, Facebook alone has 98 personal data points on its 2.2 billion users, totaling over 215 billion data points. Even more impressive is Google. Between the company's 7 unique products with over 1 billion monthly active users each, Google collects enough personal data from its users over the course of 1 year to equal almost 570,000 sheets of paper. Dan, I would love to kick things off and hear your thoughts on personalization and advertising and how data and customization have evolved over the years since advertisers were forced online.
Yeah, so over the past 10 years, right, every major advertiser has been relying on all of this data to build their primary path to performance, right? I remember back in kind of like 2010, everyone was like, it's so ridiculous to think that like all major advertising is going to move from traditional cable TV into Facebook and Google. Like that was a preposterous like suggestion to make that all the advertising dollars are going to move online to social networks. No one believed that it would happen. But as it turns out, with all that data that folks are collecting, right, those billions of data points that you just mentioned, right, we built algorithms that essentially are really good at pattern recognition and can predict buyer behavior. For instance, based on the credit card companies are actually like selling your purchase history to advertisers, right? And based on the 5 past purchases that you've made on your Amex, I can actually predict with like 95% certainty what your 6th purchase will be. And so based on that data, right, advertisers just had an absolute field day with it, right, and ran rampant. And that's why, all the ad dollars moved over to Facebook and Google because they became so good at predicting consumer behavior. Advertising became actually had this kind of foundational pivotal moment when data entered the conversation. It went from let's influence people to buy something to let's predict when someone's going to buy something and just meet them there, right? Travel to where the hockey puck is going to be. right? And so that's totally changed the game and completely changed the dynamic for advertisers today. And right now, what you're seeing is actually kind of this major movement, this pushback against it, right? iOS 14, ATT, GDPR, all these regulations by society and companies are saying, hey, enough. Let's cut this off. Let's stop showing people, let's stop showing advertisers all of this invasive data about people and kind of bring it back to the basics.
That's super interesting, Dan. And it seems that with the introduction of these new channels and mediums came a drastic shift in motive as well. So rather than selling products, creatives and marketers had to switch to making ads that focused on brand awareness and problem solving. For example, what is a consumer's problem and how can the product solve it? Now the product was no longer the centerpiece of the ad, but the consumer was. So how did technology help flip the script here, Dan?
We've kind of reached this era where, based on the ability to track consumer data and personalize ads, it's kind of this place where you can really sell anything to anyone. A lot of the startups today, all of those kind of cool kids of direct to consumer like Casper and Warby Parker and Quip and all these brands, right? So a lot of them are actually, they're not mattress companies or toothbrush companies or whatever it might be. It's no longer, they are actually digital marketing companies. Like sometimes folks come to me today and are like, hey, I'm really good at building furniture. I want to start a furniture brand. Or I want to start, insert whatever brand. And I'm like, hey, look, whatever it is that you're good at today, you're not starting a insert product company. You're actually starting a digital marketing company, right? Because being able to promote your brand and push your product out there is now 100% contingent on internal subject matter expertise and actually how to manipulate ad networks and pull the levers that are kind of behind all of this data in order to actually like get your brand awareness out there and move your product.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. We just had the founder and CEO of Flippa, the online marketplace for selling online businesses, on the podcast. He was talking about how it's not about how your business is doing or the product you're selling, but it's how you're actually getting in front of customers and how you're leveraging exactly the technology stacks out there. I mean, I just saw a Twitter thread online with this guy, Roman, who says he bought a dog ramp business and scaled it to $35 million in dog ramps. Whoever thought that selling dog ramps online was going to do $35 million in sales? But what he alluded to was that he had put the proper pieces in place from a technology point of view, that no matter what product he was really selling, it was going to succeed because he focused on all that other tech stack stuff. Is that what you're saying as well?
And it's exactly what I'm saying. And that's exactly why you see the rise of venture studios today, right? You see these powerhouse teams that it doesn't matter what product they're selling or what brand they're working with. It's a formula and you can rinse and repeat. Once you know how to pull the levers, you can do it with any product. And that's why you see all of these venture studios and startups today that are just like, there are startups today attracting like hundreds of millions of venture funding whose sole purpose is to acquire other e-commerce and DTC businesses where the founders are tapping out or don't know how to pull those levers, and they just like essentially agglomerate those and just kind of gut the internal operations, switch everything up to 100. It's like this kind of new digitally native version of private equity that's rising right now for specifically that reason.
Yeah, it's almost like creating like a farm team of baseball players and then bringing them into the gym and injecting them with a bunch of steroids and then getting them to become the New York Yankees because you have the formula on how to do it. But we'll save that for another conversation. What I'd love to jump into is some of the challenges and solutions that digital advertisers have been facing and what solutions are available these days to combat those issues. The first challenge everyone faces is with spamming digital ads and the lack of trust that it comes with. Despite advertisers' best efforts to appeal more to customers and consumers with new methods and mentality, many viewers still remain very wary of advertisements. In particular, pop-ups, audio playing videos, ads that push the main content below the fold or full ad screens, ads that increase load times, and deceptive ads as well. So Dan, what other challenges have you seen advertisers face in the digital world, and what solutions are now available to better reach consumers?
The challenges that advertisers face are not the same challenges that consumers face. And the reason that you have this, what's causing the spam on the internet? Well, it's retargeting. Retargeting works. right? Retargeting is highly performant. It's usually one of the best performing campaigns that someone has. It's kind of like spam, but it works. It's like, why do infomercials still run? Everyone can agree that, no one loves infomercials or thinks that they're beautiful, but they still run because they're a formula that works, right? So you kind of rinse and repeat. So for advertisers, they're not facing the same kind of suite of problems that consumers are facing, right? I think consumers are annoyed with the strategies, but they keep buying because of those strategies. And so I don't think you're actually going to see meaningful kind of movement away from it until performance goes down. At the end of the day, it's all about what's my return on ad spend for executing these campaigns. And brands will run things that aren't the most beautiful if the performance is the highest, right? Like if you ask a brand manager, hey, here's two ads. Ad number one is very ugly, but it performs really well, and ad number two is beautiful, but it doesn't perform well, right? Which one do you think they're going to choose, right? Well, I'd argue that I'd want to invest in the company as an investor into the one that chooses ad number one, probably. And so that's kind of a debate that's ongoing in creative circles, and it depends which stance you take. It's like it's a spectrum and it's an ideology, and some people take one side and some people take the other today.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about the solution side? User generated content is something that most consumers are starting to trust as other consumers are showing them the value of the product before they actually trust the brand. Hence the rise of this user generated content revolution on TikTok and Instagram. And so how is technology helping brands get closer to their customers while helping them build trust and assurance and authenticity while still advertising to them at the same time, Dan?
Yeah, so the rise of UGC is definitely a great example of that. Brands definitely are wanting to get closer to the consumer, and they do it through sponsoring content that seems more authentic. Today, the golden standard of ads is making ads that don't look like ads. The best way to do that is by trying to get influencers to make very organic seeming content. How is technology helping with that? Technology is aggregating marketplaces where it's very easy for brands to tap into networks of influencers who kind of know the game and know how to play it. And by that, I mean just make content that seems authentic. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. CMOs, the golden state, like right now, the holy grail for a lot of CMOs is to find just like very natural and authentic brand partnerships where consumers actually come to the product rather than brands having to approach consumers and convince them to like something. But on the other end, you have kind of this UGC world and this influencer world, and on the other kind of side of the spectrum, you have like that typical kind of branded ad creative where they're showing ads that show pictures of products that are not generated by users. UGC is just one genre. There are plenty of other genres. There's kind of like there's unboxing videos, there's image, there's dynamic product ads. And so, ads, a lot of advertisers are diversifying across those strategies. UGC is having a moment, but it's not the only tool in the toolkit right now, so to speak. There's a lot of other platforms servicing those other areas right now as well, Marpipe being one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into that in a moment. But talking about the UGC space, I think like what I see some UGC that's working really well is when you see professional athletes physically wearing a product like a Whoop device currently in the golf match, getting live statistics on the screen. It makes someone feel like, oh, this is just not a gimmick. Someone is actually using it while they're playing at the highest performance level. Therefore, I don't consider this an advertisement or product placement. I just see it as something I can actually buy and wear as well.
Yeah, it's still sponsorships, right? Like it comes off authentic, great. It really does because LeBron James is actually wearing that brand's shoes when he's playing on the court. But if another brand comes along and offers him a better deal, what do you think he's going to do? So it works. It has its place in the kind of media mix that most companies use. It's not a space that like I particularly that we work in right now, or that we're paying attention to because we're seeing really the rise of dynamic creative and dynamic product ads actually have way more of an impact for paid social. So I think it has its place. I think it works. But I think there's other interesting areas to focus on that technology is pushing along a lot further than influencer content.
No, that makes perfect sense. Now let's get into some of that meaty stuff that you're focusing on, which is performance-based marketing, creative options. With so many data points available to advertisers, as you said, they're able to create extremely targeted and personalized ads. As we mentioned at the beginning of the show, advertisers today have the billions of data points about consumers from Google and Facebook, allowing digital advertisers to create hyper-targeted ads in real time, which is why 40 cents of every venture dollar invested in startups goes to Facebook and Google. So, how has performance based marketing evolved over the years to be more data driven, and why should marketing teams be more focused on it?
Over the past 10 years, right, you've had this like the all advertisers build their main path to performance leaning on the crutch of in pretty much invasive audience targeting. And right now we're actually living through a moment that I consider like really a kind of a once in a decade event in the digital marketing space. And it's changing everything because what's happening is these companies like Apple and government bodies like the European Union have decided, hey, that crutch that you've been leaning on, invasive audience targeting, is being pulled out from under you right now. It's no longer something you can do. Forget about it. Figure it out. Right. And so, like, they've built this house leaning on top of this crutch and it's pulled out from under them. And the foundation of that house is falling down right now. Right. And so, what do? Well, you've got to find alternative paths to performance. And so, there's really what emerged in this industry right now is actually two main alternative paths to performance. Right. So, one is contextual advertising, right? So, for instance, if I'm like selling diapers, right, to new parents, rather than kind of looking at your purchase history and seeing that you just bought baby food and then following you around the internet with my diapers ads, instead, what contextual advertising allows you to do is appear next to relevant content that parents might be reading, right? So, like, for instance, I'm going to serve my ads next to articles and content that talks about, changing how to change a baby's diaper. So that way you're actually you're targeting people based on you're targeting content rather than people, right? And so you're showing up next to relevant content that that might be very relevant to your audience, rather than singling out individual audience members and following them around the internet, right? And so from there, you have companies like Moat and Double Verify and IAS, Integral Ad Sciences. IAS and Double Verify just IPO'd. Went from having a sub $1 billion valuation to right before their IPO to now being worth $5 billion on the stock market. They're capitalizing on this trend, right? You have this massive, this kind of, before it was a nice to have, now it's a need to have. Now that's path number one, contextual advertising, right? That's the one alternative path to performance. Alternative path to performance number two is better creative, right? So in a world where your audience targeting capabilities become more deprecated, your creative actually becomes more important. Here's why. So if I know your past 5 purchases on your Amex card, right, I can predict what your 6th purchase will be. And I actually don't really even need to sell you on it. I just need to show you the picture of the product that I already know you're going to buy at the right time. So essentially, all we need to do is show people a product picture. There's really not much more to it. Like, you've seen those ads that are literally just a product image with no backgrounds. That's one of Facebook and Instagram's highest performing, creative units because they're just able to predict and show people the ad for the product that they already know they're going to buy. Now, in a world where I can't track your purchases and predict your behavior, I have to zoom out and target your general demographic, not you, right? And so in that world, I have to make creative that's much more broadly appealing, right? Just generally showcasing my suite of products or talking about my brand and the value props we offer and why we're different, right? And so all of those things make creative variables and visual variables significantly more important. And so focusing on making your actual ad creative better and doing so in a really kind of strict and methodical way, treating it with the same analytical rigor that you used to treat your audience targeting with, is actually emerging as the kind of second main alternative path to performance. And right now, with what we're building at Marpipe, we find ourselves benefiting from this tidal wave of inbound right now because we're servicing that specific need. Now it's a need to have. Before it was a nice to have. And so, this creative data, which talks about what people most love to see and hear from ads rather than, who's going to buy in the future, is kind of having this moment, and is a very nascent industry that's totally blowing up right now.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I mean, I got to ask though, are we still in the Don Draper era of creative and advertising? Like, meaning people are just coming up with fun and quirky ad creatives inside their companies or agencies when launching new ad campaigns? Like, what does creative look like before someone figures out what Marpipe can help them with?
Yeah, that's a great question, and currently, I would say yes, we are still in that era, and it's crazy because the single most important thing that the single most important element to performance on digital marketing is not your audience targeting, not your brand, not your reach, even. It's actually your ad creative, right? It's the one thing you can change that can have the biggest impact on performance by far. Facebook and Google and Nielsen publish studies about this every year, confirming this year over year. And if you look at everything that's done in digital marketing today, from audience targeting to bidding to placement, everything benefits from data science and automation, except for creative. Creative is entirely untouched by data and automation. Before I started Marpipe, I ran a creative production and digital marketing agency. We were making ad creative for brands. And honestly, I always thought I was doing something wrong. I thought I was like some naive kid because honestly, Matt, we were just making stuff that we thought looked cool and hoping that brands would like it. Like, we would be like, hey, we think this looks cool. Do you think this looks cool? And they would be like, yeah, we like that. Or they'd be like, no, we don't like it. Change these things, right? And that was our process. Like, the process that we had was literally as simple as it could possibly be. Like, it's just arbitrary taste making and kind of guessing and checking. I thought we were doing something wrong. So I went to Madison Avenue. I talked to creative directors with 20 years experience. I was like, guys, help me out here. What am I missing? What am I getting wrong? And they were like, oh yeah, no, our process is exactly the same thing, pretty much, right? Like, and I couldn't believe that, like, the actual process of making and pitching ad creative still operates pretty much as a workflow the same way you saw in Mad Men. It's still Don Draper walking into those board meeting rooms and, like, showing people slides and pitching concepts. It's the same thing still, just done over MacBooks now. One of the things that it's really important to highlight here is that this system doesn't work, right? Because humans are very bad at predicting what ad creative will work. No matter how many years of experience you have being an ad creative or a marketer, I'm sorry, but the truth of the matter is that over 90% of the ads that are launched online are turned off within their first 7 days of running, right? Meaning most of the things we think will work fail, right? Being a successful ad creative is like being a pitcher in the MLB, right? If you hit 2 out of every 10 balls thrown your way, you're a legend. You're going to the Hall of Fame, right? What I'm saying here is that the expected failure rate is very, very high for, like, what is considered a good performance, right? Like, the average good career creative has a few home runs, like 10 home runs in their career, and then like 1,000 skeletons in their closet, like 1,000 things that didn't work, right? And so what this means is it doesn't actually matter what the ad creative thinks looks good or what they like, because they're probably wrong. It doesn't matter what the client thinks looks good or what they like, because they're probably wrong, right? Well, the only thing that matters is what do the consumers most want to see and hear from you, right? And if you can have that data, you can use that to inform your creative process, thus making a data-driven creative process for the first time that's agnostic of our own individual preferences. And that's what Marpipe helps people do, collect that data.
It's so interesting. I picture you walking in on those Madison Avenue offices and hearing them say to you, Dan, you got to sell the sizzle, not the steak. Sell the benefits, not the features. That's marketing 101. That's the same thing you see in the shows from 50 years ago. But, how is creative starting to become the center of advertising again? And as people now have the ability to actually quantify the impacts of ad campaigns versus just those qualitative metrics people have been relying on for those 50 years.
We believe that creative is a science, not an art. It has elements of both, but it is more of a science than an art. And that's a place where we put our foot down and make a definitive stance today because we finally have the technology, which is new technology, to be able to make that a reality. Today, like the creatives of today are kind of the way that creative directors justify their kind of big salaries and big titles is they say, hey, we've got the experience to be able to know what works and what doesn't. But whenever you approach a creative with a lot of experience and, for instance, show them a bunch of ads and say, have them try to predict which one worked best, they almost always get it wrong, right? We've ran this experiment many times. And, that's not to say that like creatives are not important. No, creatives need to generate ideas, and they're like idea generation machines, right? And like right now, computers can't do that, right? Computers can't come up with novel, clever concepts. But the thing is, we need to create a lot and test them all, because how are you just going to arbitrarily choose and narrow down to one, right? You're making like a very consequential business decision. And now you don't have to choose just one, right? You can actually throw up 100 ideas on the whiteboard and rapidly test all of them to find out which one works. I guarantee you, almost every time you do that, the positive outlier, the big winner, is going to be something that you didn't even expect at all would be the winner, right? And so it's about actually playing the numbers game, right? It's about Moneyball. Let's not care about what it looks like or what people think is a shiny object. Let's actually just play the numbers game and test everything, because we can now, and let the kind of the numbers and consumers guide our decisions rather than our biases, right? And so we think that really the creatives of tomorrow will look a lot more like engineers and scientists rather than like traditional artists, and we're building the stack to be able to really enable them to do their thing. Sometimes we say we're arming the rebels, so to speak, because we're giving young creatives the ability to kind of out-test their competition and their elders and discover the most performant ideas in a very structured way.
Yeah, I can imagine you just pissing off basically every creative walking around Madison Avenue right now by saying something like that. But hey, I mean, that's why we bet on Marpipe as the future and not some hipster walking around on Madison Avenue. So what makes Marpipe so amazing at creative-based performance advertising? And what kind of ROI are customers seeing by using a product like Marpipe?
So the idea is right. So like the idea is pretty simple. It boils down to this. You can, every time you make even the most granular visual change in your ad creative, like if you replace the background color with blue, from blue to green, or if you replace a cactus in the background with a palm tree, right? Even the most granular visual variables, when changed, have a material impact on performance. And what we discovered is that if you just keep making a bunch of changes to your creative, right, iterating on variables within your creative, like the colors or the messaging or the product image that's used, or like whether there's humans in it, and you just change a bunch of those factors very quickly, it actually, you can generate a lot of volatility in like a small bubble. And if you can generate a lot of volatility in a very predictable way in a bubble, then what you also end up doing is predictably generating positive outliers, right? And so the concept behind Marpipe is we actually built a design platform from scratch where creatives can jump in, and it's reminiscent of what you would see with like a Canva or a Adobe Creative Cloud, but like obviously more basic than that. And creatives are jumping in there building ad creative. They'll build an ad, and Marpipe will enable them to actually render out hundreds of different versions of that ad within minutes, right? To create all of these different permutations that are testing all of these different things with their existing brand assets within their existing brand guidelines, right? Then we publish all of those things directly to their target audiences that they're already marketing against, right? On Facebook, Instagram, Google. And we're able to very rapidly discover, whenever you test 100 ads, that number one winning ad is going to be a positive outlier that you should scale, right? And so it's actually a very like the challenge is, how do you make and deploy 100 ads? And that's the part that Marpipe automates, right? So you're able to out-test and out-learn from your tests. So as a result, you're able to predictably generate positive outliers. And you're also able to kind of learn not just which ads perform well, but why? Which elements most contribute to positive or negative performance whenever they're present, no matter what else they're combined with. And so, because we're bringing the power of multivariate testing to advertisers for the first time, like they're not able to do it without automation, and we're the only ones automating it right now. Because we're bringing it to the table for them right now, well, they're seeing predictable performance increases of anywhere between kind of like a 30% performance improvement to slicing their cost per acquisition in half within just the first 2 to 3 months of testing. But again, Marpipe is a tool. It enables you to completely amplify the hell out of your testing efforts. And so, if it's garbage in, it's going to be garbage out, right? If you test, if you're running, bad tests, they're not gonna do great, right? And so the creative is still very much in the driver's seat, and being a creative and thinking about concepts to test. But what the creative isn't doing is doing all of the kind of monotonous labor and repetitive work of actually piecing together and assembling all of those ad creatives and then launching them. Marpipe handles all of that for you now. So now you can just kind of just sit there and come up with tons of ideas and then let Marpipe do the rest.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, you said you put creative in the driver's seat, but you do more than that, really. You actually supercharge them and give them a need for speed on kind of the ROI in real time. Can you give our audience some examples of maybe some brands that you work with who are seeing a tremendous pickup in ROI from the creative side as well?
We're often asked the question, who's your target customer? Like, what brands should be using Marpipe? And really, that's like asking, what brands should be using A/B testing, right? Like, it's a methodology that generally works for anybody who's just putting money behind ads, right? Like, it's just a thing you should do. And so, Marpipe bringing multivariate testing, which is the next evolution of A/B testing, to the table for folks, we have a truly mixed bag of customers. Literally, the only qualifying criteria we have is that you should be spending 25K per month or more on your digital advertising efforts. If you're below that, then Marpipe might just be like overkill for you. But if you're above that, then you should be talking to us. And our customers are like all over the board, from B2B, tech unicorns like Segment and MongoDB, to the cool kids of direct to consumer, like Quip, to major national retailers like Guitar Center, to like international clothing brands like Crocs, right? And so it's really a mixed, and like holding companies like Mars, or PepsiCo. So it's a really mixed bag of users, because it does work for anyone putting money behind ad creative, period. And just to highlight, a few case studies, Segment has been using Marpipe as the operating system for their creative testing for the past over 2 years now. They were one of our actually first early adopters, and they just recently renewed an annual contract with us, and they see a consistent kind of every quarter kind of a compounding 20 to 30% performance improvement every quarter, month over month, right? And so that's really just been working really well for them. And what, more so beyond the kind of numbers, the performance improvement, what they're discovering is all of these creative anomalies between their target customers, right? Like Segment, for instance, sells to different demographic groups, as do most companies, right? Like Segment is selling enterprise software to engineers, is one of their buyers, and then also to, product managers. What it turns out is that the variable that impacts performance the most for some of these groups is actually, background colors and patterns, right? Make a huge difference in performance for a lot of B2B brands. It's something that we've noticed and seen in the background. And we've noticed that a lot of the creatives building this creative are focusing on the wrong things. Like messaging has less of an impact generally, actually, than colors. And so these kinds of things and like the placement of them and the sizing of them, have an outsized impact for B2B creative. And, that's one of the things we've discovered that's like a very unique takeaway with Segment that has changed the direction of their creative team. Now the creative team isn't trying to experiment with the things that they thought they should be experimenting with. They're kind of following the data and going down this rabbit hole of experimenting with different color palettes and gradients, because they're seeing how much of an impact on performance those things really have, which is more than other variables. And so that's just an interesting takeaway that you wouldn't have otherwise known. if you weren't using, multivariate testing.
Yeah, it's super interesting that like the KISS model really still works till today. Keep it simple, stupid, right? If you look at all the logos that were created in like the 90s and the early 2000s from all the big tech companies, they had all like multicolors and big fonts and all, curvy fonts. And all of them have converted back to the same font, the same style. Airbnb, Facebook, Google, everything is looking the exact same now. And I think it's because humans are pretty similar in the way they like to consume stuff. And so trying to be different or too different may end up hurting you rather than helping you, which is why something like Marpipe can actually hone in on that with data, right?
Exactly. And when we talk about creative trends, right? We know that trends in fashion and it's all cyclical, right? It goes in cycles and like people's creative preferences are always changing, but really what works for every brand that we found is totally unique to that specific brand. Like for instance, if you have a company that looks very similar to another company, let's say you guys are selling similar products to similar people in a similar kind of price range, what we found that works and really moves the needle for them can actually be very different for what moves it for, your neighbor. And so it's important to actually test and learn for yourself to discover what moves the needle for you, because it'll be unique to your brand and your product offering. So that's why, we recommend that, all companies should be testing centralized, always be testing, of course. We know that the best practice is to take 10 to 20% of your monthly ad spend and dedicate that strictly to testing new things rather than scaling existing winners. And what Marpipe allows you to do is make the most out of that budget, right? You can now test hundreds of ads for the same price that you tested, 5 or 10 ads every month with. And you're going to discover bigger positive outliers and winners, and you're going to learn what moves the needle so that your creative team moves much more methodically and strategically rather than just kind of blindly throwing darts at a wall.
Yeah, no, it's all super exciting and super interesting. Where do you see the future of performance-based marketing going, and how is Marpipe trying to lead this part of the market?
We think that the future of targeting will be based on creative preferences rather than individual data about people, right? So, and this is actually something that, we know that Facebook and Google are actively exploring right now, kind of building out the infrastructure for that. Imagine a world where instead of targeting people who are age 25 to 30 living in New York City making over 100 grand a month, imagine instead of that, I could target people in the US who really love this specific shade of blue and enjoy pictures of toothbrushes and diverse models, right? Like it's a creative first, essentially like targeting infrastructure where we're actually relying on visual preferences and putting the visuals first, the creative first, essentially, rather than the kind of audience first. And this is a really radical concept right now. This is something that folks are still warming up to, but that we see getting a lot of really early attention. This is kind of one of those curveball things that sounded wacky before, but just like, it sounded wacky that all of cable TV was going to move to Facebook ad spend, we're really bullish on that specific trend taking over. And, we think that the movement against invasive audience targeting will continue to get stronger. Like we're not backpedaling on that decision anytime soon. And that's really changed everything in the game. And that just happened within the past 6 months. And so you have this major shakeup in the industry. Everyone is confused. It's kind of chaotic. A lot of businesses are failing and hurt from it. A lot of other businesses are having their moment because of it. Businesses like IAS, Double Verify, and like Marpipe. And so there's going to be this new generation of solutions that are essentially working around invasive audience targeting, not doing it, and offering people alternative solutions. And so we just hope to be a flag bearer in that space as it continues to get bigger and bigger. And so it's still super early. It's very nascent. And that's what makes it a really exciting space to follow.
Yeah, definitely exciting. And you're definitely getting noticed. I mean, you recently closed an $8 million Series A round led by Stage 2 Capital, along with ourselves at Ripple, Samsung Ventures, Laconia Capital, and several strategic like Mark Roberge from former CRO of HubSpot, Greg Coleman, former president of BuzzFeed, and others. So what are your plans with the funding, and how can people get in touch with you if they're interested in working together?
Yeah, so we were initially regarding the funding, we didn't raise a Series A because we were running out of money. We raised a Series A because we had more inbound than we could handle, and we wanted to proactively really attack the market and really kind of this market for us right now, because we find ourselves to be one of the only folks in the creative data space. It feels like a land grab. Folks are confused. If you approach any marketer today and you ask them, questions like, how do you decide what your ad creative should look like? Do you remember what you learned from your creative test 3 months ago? Nobody knows nobody has a good answers for you for those basic questions that have become really important out of nowhere, right? And so we're standing here as Marpipe saying, hey, we built a solution for all of those really big, dark question marks. And so folks, all our growth right now is 100% inbound, and we're just our sales folks are booked out for the next 2 weeks, and we're kind of building out our infrastructure to be able to process that inbound and convert it and be able to really serve those customers very well. So it was a very proactive raise. And today Marpipe has a really tight integration with Facebook and Instagram and works for image creative very well. But with this $8 million, not only do we hope to build out our own support infrastructure to be able to handle this inbound that we're seeing, but also we want to move to different formats like video and audio. And we also want to expand to tight integrations with everywhere else where our major advertisers serve media. So places like Google and Pinterest and LinkedIn and Twitter, and then also programmatic. So places like Trade Desk and MediaMath, who MediaMath's venture arm was actually an investor in us. And so a lot of these folks we're already in contact with, a lot of these ad networks who are definitely excited and eager to work with us and for us to build integrations. We've just got to stack the bricks. And so it's really exciting what we're going to be able to do with this funding. And if folks want to see Marpipe for themselves and get a demo and try it out, I totally recommend you guys go to marpipe.com and just book a demo right there with one of our sales folks. We're rapidly staffing up our sales team. And we're going to be really excited to talk to you. As long as you're spending over $25K a month in ad spend, you should definitely have a conversation with us and see what this is all about.
Yeah, it's super fast growing and it's super exciting for all of us involved. So thank you for allowing us to be a part of this rocket ship journey with Marpipe. So before we wrap things up, we always ask our guests for their fast favorites, where I list off 6 topics of your favorite of each, and you list each one off. So first one, your favorite podcast.
How to Take Over the World with Benjamin Wilson. He dives deep on biographies of historical figures like Steve Jobs or Napoleon, and tells you facts that you would never learn in conventional history class about what they were really like behind the scenes. So,
wow, hopefully one day you're on that podcast as a topic.
Maybe.
Next one, favorite newsletter or blog.
Bankless. It's a Substack done by one of the most prolific DAOs in the crypto space right now. And it's really helping me learn a lot and get my chops in crypto.
Nice. Favorite tech gadget?
AirPod Pros, man. I'm on those things all day, every day.
Yeah, I'd say that represents about 70% of our favorite tech gadgets on the podcast. Favorite new trend?
DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. I'm super fascinated by this new structure of collaboration between really smart people and engineers. And I'm excited to follow it and be involved in a few.
Do you think Marpipe's going to be a DAO?
Probably not.
Okay, good answer. Favorite book?
Black Swan by Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Fantastic book. And last but not least, your favorite life lesson?
It's just to only worry about things that are within your direct control. Too many people spend too much time worrying about things that are not within their direct control. Just spend your time focusing on worrying about the things you can directly change, and let go of things that you don't have any control or influence over.
Fantastic advice, especially for a lot of young founders out there trying to put out fires every day when building a startup. So thank you very much for sharing that. And thanks for joining us in the tank today, Dan, to talk about the evolution of AdTech and the need for speed with Dan Pantelo from Marpipe, founder and CEO.
Thanks for having me, Matt. This is fun.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Tank Talks. To learn more about this episode, be sure to go to Apple Podcast or Spotify to find more detailed notes on this episode or to check out previous episodes. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and a rating, as it helps us out a lot. And hit that subscribe button so you can get notified when new episodes come out. Finally, make sure to give me a follow on Twitter @MattyBCohen or @Tank Talk Podcast to stay up to date on new episodes or to be a guest on our show. Till next time,